If you enjoy my channel, please give me a like, subscribe, and share this video. Thank you so much.
Did I lose everything? Have you ever woken up at 3 in the morning, stared at the ceiling, and wondered, if I disappeared for a few days, would anyone really notice? Sounds dramatic, right? But that was exactly how I felt during that winter in the United States. Outside my apartment window, snow was falling so slowly that the whole world looked like a movie playing at half speed. Inside, the heater made this annoying buzzing sound, like it was personally reminding me that next month's electric bill was going to hurt. And there I was, sitting alone with a cold cup of coffee, a broken relationship, a stressful job. And that heavy feeling of failure stuck to me like cigarette smoke on a winter jacket. The funny part was, from the outside, I looked completely fine. You know that type of person? Still showing up to work on time. Still saying I'm good every time someone asks how you're doing. Still posting normal pictures online like life is perfectly stable. But inside, you feel like a phone stuck at 1% battery, trying to keep the screen bright so nobody notices it's about to shut down. That was me. A lot of people think failure in America has to look huge. Losing your house. Going broke. Getting fired. But sometimes failure is quieter than that. Sometimes it's simply waking up one day and realizing you no longer recognize yourself. You keep moving through life without knowing what you're even trying to reach anymore. And the scariest part isn't bad English, money problems, or hard work. It's feeling like nobody truly understands what's happening inside your head. I used to believe that if I worked hard enough, everything would eventually get better. Sounds exactly like one of those motivational quotes floating around the internet, doesn't it? Work hard and everything will be fine. It sounds amazing, until you're completely exhausted. Life in the United States moves fast. People talk fast. Drive fast. Work fast. Even sadness feels rushed because you still have to wake up early the next morning. There was a period when I felt like I was running on a treadmill. My legs kept moving, but my life wasn't actually going anywhere. I still remember that Friday evening after work. I stopped by a small grocery store near my apartment. Nothing special. Bright white lights. Air conditioning way too cold. Shopping carts crashing into each other like background music for adult stress. I stood in front of the frozen food section for almost 10 minutes trying to decide whether I should buy the discounted pizza or the bigger pack of instant noodles to save a few extra dollars. Sounds tiny, right? But when your life starts falling apart, even small decisions feel exhausting. There's actually psychological research in the U.S. showing that long-term stress reduces the brain's ability to make simple decisions. That's why when you're emotionally drained, even choosing what to eat can suddenly feel overwhelming. Your brain basically turns into an office worker forced to do overtime without a weekend break. I picked up the pizza box, then slowly put it back down. That's when my phone vibrated. A message from my ex. Just one short sentence. I think we both need different lives. I read it 3 times. Not because the English was difficult, but because deep down, I knew this time it was really over. The strange thing was, I didn't cry immediately. Human brains are weird sometimes. When pain gets too heavy, your mind switches into this numb survival mode to protect you. I just stood there in the middle of the grocery store while cheerful Christmas music played overhead like some kind of cruel joke. Meanwhile, inside my head, everything was completely silent. You can live in one of the busiest countries in the world and still feel like the loneliest person alive. That night, I drove around for almost an hour without knowing where I was going. American streets at night are honestly beautiful. Yellow streetlights reflecting on wet roads after snow and rain. Fast food restaurants glowing in the dark. People laughing inside small bars while life kept moving forward like nothing had happened to you at all. And honestly, life really does work that way. The world doesn't stop just because your heart is breaking. Sounds harsh, doesn't it? But later, that truth actually saved me. I parked near a quiet public park. Inside the car, it was so cold that the windows slowly started fogging up. I sat there for a long time, and for the first time in months, I admitted something honestly to myself. I was tired. Tired of pretending to be strong. Tired of acting okay. Tired of scrolling through other people's perfect lives online and wondering why mine felt like such a mess. There's something very few people talk about when it comes to adult life in America. Loneliness doesn't come from being alone. It comes from feeling like you can't honestly tell anyone what you're really going through. People here are polite. They smile. They ask, "How are you?" But most of the time, they're not expecting the real answer. And slowly, I realized something. Maybe I had been living in survival mode for too long. Eating fast. Working fast. Thinking fast. But never actually stopping long enough to ask myself what I truly needed. That night, I had no idea my life was about to change. Not in some Hollywood movie kind of way. No dramatic music. No magical moment. Just a series of ordinary conversations, slow evenings, and one person who appeared exactly when I was starting to lose faith in love, and in myself. The strange thing about failure is this. Sometimes failure isn't a closed door. Sometimes it's life pulling you away from a place that no longer fits who you are becoming. But back then, I didn't understand that yet. At that moment, I was just sitting alone inside a freezing car during an American winter, believing everything in my life was over. When really, the story was only beginning. The silent apartment in America. Nobody warns you about the silence. People talk about expensive healthcare, long work hours, cultural differences, taxes, relationships, and stress in America. But almost nobody talks about the silence waiting for you at the end of the day. The kind of silence that slowly sits beside you in a tiny apartment while the microwave spins your frozen dinner at midnight. That silence became my nightly roommate. Every evening after work, I drove back to the same apartment complex with its identical gray buildings and empty parking spaces. During the daytime, the place looked normal enough. Kids riding scooters. Delivery drivers dropping off packages. Neighbors walking dogs while pretending not to notice each other too much. But at night, everything felt strangely disconnected. Like hundreds of people were living side by side while carrying completely separate worlds inside their heads. And honestly, I became one of them. My apartment wasn't terrible. Small living room. Cheap couch. Thin walls. A refrigerator that made random noises at 2 in the morning like it was trying to communicate with ghosts. Typical adult life stuff. But after the breakup, the place started feeling less like a home and more like a waiting room for a life that wasn't happening anymore. I developed weird little habits without realizing it. I would leave the TV running just to hear human voices in the background. Sometimes I played YouTube videos while cooking because complete silence made my thoughts louder. Other nights, I drove around town longer than necessary because I didn't want to walk into that apartment yet. Psychologists actually have a term for this. Emotional isolation. It happens when you're physically surrounded by people but emotionally disconnected from meaningful human interaction. And apparently, the human brain reacts to loneliness almost the same way it reacts to physical pain. Which honestly explains a lot. Because some nights, loneliness felt physical. Not dramatic movie loneliness. Not sitting in the rain crying while sad piano music plays. Real loneliness is weirder than that. It's reheating coffee 3 times because you forgot to drink it. It's opening your phone every 5 minutes even though you know nobody texted you. It's hearing your own footsteps inside the apartment and suddenly realizing you haven't spoken out loud in hours. One Sunday afternoon, I noticed something embarrassing. I had started talking to myself. Not full conversations or anything terrifying. Mostly tiny comments while cooking or cleaning. Where did I put the keys? That chicken is definitely expired. Wow, this weather is ridiculous. At first, I laughed about it. Then I remembered reading an article saying people often talk to themselves when they feel emotionally isolated for long periods. Apparently, hearing a voice, even your own, can make the brain feel slightly less alone. Human beings are fascinating and deeply pathetic sometimes. The hardest part wasn't even the loneliness itself. It was pretending it wasn't affecting me. At work, everybody seemed busy building lives. Weekend trips. Relationships. Gym memberships. Family barbecues. Even their stress looked organized somehow. Meanwhile, I felt like I was constantly trying to keep my mental health from sliding off a cliff while still answering emails professionally. And then there was the weather. Nobody understands American winter depression until they actually experience it. Back home, cold weather felt cozy sometimes. In certain parts of the United States, winter feels personal. The sky turns gray for days. Darkness arrives at 4:30 in the afternoon like the sun just gave up early. You leave work and it already feels like midnight. Your body gets less sunlight, your energy drops, and suddenly your brain starts acting like a tired raccoon searching for emotional support snacks. Seasonal depression is very real here. Studies show reduced sunlight affects serotonin and melatonin levels, which directly impacts mood, sleep, and emotional stability. Basically, your brain chemistry starts throwing tiny emotional tantrums without asking your permission first. One night, during a snowstorm, my internet stopped working. Now, this shouldn't have been a huge problem. But modern adults react to losing Wi-Fi like 19th century villagers watching the apocalypse begin. I sat there staring at the router lights like somehow intense eye contact would fix everything. No internet. No music. No videos. No distractions. Just silence. I remember sitting on the floor wrapped in a blanket, listening to the wind hitting the windows. And for some reason, that was the exact moment my emotions finally caught up with me. Not anger. Not even sadness exactly. Just emptiness. You ever feel emotionally tired in a way sleep can't fix? That was it. I started thinking about all the little things people never mention when talking about adult life in America. How easy it is to slowly drift into isolation. How nobody notices when you stop laughing as much. How some people spend years functioning perfectly while quietly falling apart inside. And then something strange happened. My phone buzzed. One notification. A local coffee shop announcing they were still open despite the snowstorm. That was it. Completely ordinary. But after sitting alone in silence for hours, that tiny message felt weirdly important. Like proof that somewhere outside my apartment, life was still happening. So I grabbed my jacket and drove through the snow. The roads were nearly empty. Streetlights reflected against fresh snow like scenes from a quiet Christmas movie nobody was watching. I almost turned back twice because honestly, leaving the apartment during a storm sounded like terrible decision-making. But something inside me kept driving. When I finally walked into that coffee shop, warm air hit my face immediately. The smell of espresso. Soft music playing in the background. A few tired people sitting with laptops. Nothing extraordinary. And yet, it felt like entering another universe. Then I saw her for the first time. Not some dramatic movie entrance. She wasn't glowing under magical lighting while romantic music played in the background. She was just standing behind the counter wearing a dark green sweater, looking slightly tired like every other adult working during winter in America. But she smiled at me. A normal smile. A small one. And somehow, after weeks of emotional numbness, that simple human moment felt bigger than it should have. Funny, isn't it? Sometimes your entire life changes not because of one huge event, but because somebody looked at you kindly at exactly the moment you were starting to disappear inside yourself. Broken English at the coffee shop. There's something strangely terrifying about ordering coffee when your confidence is already falling apart. Not because coffee is complicated. It's because tiny conversations suddenly feel enormous when you've spent too much time doubting yourself. Your brain starts treating simple human interaction like you're negotiating world peace instead of asking for a medium latte. That snowy night, I stood inside the coffee shop pretending to study the menu even though I'd already read it 3 times. People in line behind me looked relaxed. Comfortable. Fluent. Meanwhile, my brain was preparing for battle over basic English sentences. Hi, what can I get for you today? Simple question. Completely normal. And somehow my mind still panicked like an emergency alarm had gone off. When it was finally my turn, I stepped forward too quickly, almost slipped on melted snow near the counter, caught myself awkwardly, and immediately wanted to disappear into another dimension. Great start. The woman behind the counter looked up at me. Same green sweater. Same calm eyes. She smiled politely, probably used to exhausted people wandering into the cafe during winter storms. What can I get started for you? And suddenly every English word I had ever learned abandoned me like coworkers leaving exactly at 5 o'clock on Friday. You know that feeling? When your brain becomes an empty parking lot at midnight? That. Coffee. Excellent communication skills. Truly inspiring. She waited patiently. What kind? My brain started buffering. At that moment, I forgot every coffee name in America. Latte. Cappuccino. Mocha. Espresso. Gone. Completely erased from existence. Finally, I pointed at the menu like a confused tourist trying to survive civilization. That one. She glanced at the menu and smiled slightly. The caramel latte? Yes. Yes. That. Then came the next terrifying question. What size? Why does America have 70 different cup sizes for liquids? Small. Medium. Large. Tall. Grande. Venti. At some point, coffee ordering starts sounding like a secret language created by emotionally exhausted adults. I froze for 2 full seconds before answering. Normal? She laughed quietly. Not a mean laugh. Not mocking. Just a soft, tired laugh, like she understood exactly what kind of day I was having. That's okay, she said gently. Medium is normal. And weirdly enough, that tiny sentence stayed in my head long after I left. Medium is normal. Because for weeks, nothing in my life had felt normal. While waiting for my drink, I sat near the window watching snow fall outside under yellow streetlights. The cafe was warm, calm, almost sleepy. People typed on laptops. A couple quietly shared dessert in the corner. Somebody was reading a paperback novel while absent-mindedly stirring tea. Ordinary moments. But when you've been emotionally isolated long enough, ordinary moments start feeling magical. Then I heard her voice again. Caramel latte? I walked over, grabbed the cup, and accidentally touched the hot lid wrong. Ah. Smooth. Very smooth. She laughed again. You okay? Yeah, I said. My hands forgot how temperature works. That actually made her laugh harder. And for the first time in weeks, I laughed too. It sounds ridiculous now, honestly. Imagine your emotional recovery beginning because of coffee-related embarrassment. Human beings are unbelievably strange creatures. But psychology explains this pretty well. Researchers have found that small positive social interactions, even brief conversations with strangers, can significantly improve emotional state and reduce feelings of loneliness. Tiny moments of kindness activate reward systems in the brain. Basically, your nervous system relaxes slightly when someone treats you like you matter. And apparently my nervous system had been starving. I started going back to that cafe almost every evening. At first, I told myself it was because the coffee was good. Which was partially true. But mostly, it was because that place felt alive in a way my apartment didn't anymore. The strange thing about loneliness is that you don't always notice how emotionally hungry you are until somebody speaks to you warmly. Little by little, I began talking more. Very slowly. Very awkwardly. Some conversations lasted only 20 seconds. How's your day going? Tired. Very tired. Same. Tiny exchanges like that shouldn't matter much. But they did. One evening, she noticed me reading the same page of a book for almost 10 minutes. Tough chapter, she asked. I looked up and admitted the truth. Honestly? My brain is just tired today. She nodded immediately like she understood. America does that sometimes. That sentence hit harder than she probably realized. Because until then, I thought maybe I was simply weak. Maybe everyone else handled life here perfectly while I struggled with stress, loneliness, and exhaustion. But slowly I started realizing something important. A lot of people here are overwhelmed. They just hide it better. Especially adults. Especially people trying to hold jobs, relationships, bills, responsibilities, and emotional stability together at the same time. One night we talked longer than usual because the cafe was nearly empty. She asked where I was from. I asked how long she'd worked there. Turns out she had 2 kids and worked evening shifts because daytime childcare was expensive. She said this while cleaning tables like it was completely normal. And maybe in America, it was. That's another thing people don't always understand about life here. Many adults are exhausted all the time. Not lazy. Not unmotivated. Just stretched emotionally thin by constant pressure. Bills. Schedules. Insurance. Work. Raising children. Trying not to lose your mind between all of it. The more we talked, the more I noticed something surprising. She spoke slowly to me. Not in a rude way. Not like I was stupid. Just clearly. Patiently. Naturally. And somehow, my English improved because of that. Not from textbooks. Not from grammar exercises. From real conversations. That's the funny thing about language learning nobody explains properly. People don't improve because they memorize thousands of words. They improve because they slowly stop being afraid of human connection. Fear blocks communication faster than bad grammar ever will. Some nights I still made embarrassing mistakes. Once I accidentally said I'm boring instead of I'm bored. Another time I confidently used the wrong tense and somehow turned a simple story into accidental time travel. But she never made me feel stupid. She would smile, correct me naturally, and continue the conversation like mistakes were normal. Because they are normal. Especially in real life. Especially when you're emotionally rebuilding yourself at the same time. And somewhere during those winter evenings filled with coffee cups, awkward English, soft music, and slow conversations, something inside me began changing. Not dramatically. Not all at once. But quietly. Like ice slowly melting after a long winter. I still didn't realize how important this woman was about to become in my life. At that point, she was simply the kind barista at the coffee shop who made difficult days feel slightly easier to survive. But looking back now, that cafe didn't just help me practice English. It reminded me how to feel human again. The woman who appeared at the right time. You know what's dangerous? Not heartbreak. Not failure. Not even loneliness. The truly dangerous thing is when you slowly get used to emotional numbness. When surviving becomes your normal routine. When you stop expecting life to surprise you in a good way. That was exactly where I was emotionally when she started becoming part of my everyday life. At first, she was simply the woman from the coffee shop. That's it. No dramatic music. No instant romance. No movie-style chemistry where two people lock eyes and suddenly the universe explodes with meaning. Real life is quieter than that. Most meaningful relationships begin in ordinary moments people almost ignore. Mine started with coffee stains, tired conversations, and winter evenings that smelled like espresso and melted snow. I began showing up at the cafe so often that she memorized my order. Medium caramel latte, she'd say before I even reached the counter. And weirdly, that tiny detail mattered more than it should have. Because when life feels unstable, being remembered by someone feels strangely powerful. There's actually psychology behind this. Human beings are emotionally wired to seek recognition and familiarity. Even small moments, somebody remembering your name, your usual order, or asking how your day went, activate feelings of connection and emotional safety. Basically, your brain quietly says, oh, maybe I'm not invisible after all. One evening after work, I walked into the cafe looking especially exhausted. You ever have one of those days where your soul feels like it accidentally worked overtime too? That was me. She noticed immediately. Long day? I laughed tiredly. Long life. That made her smile. Yeah, she said softly. I understand that one. Something about the way she said it felt honest. Not polite. Not automatic. Honest. And that's when I started paying closer attention to her too. She always looked slightly tired, but steady. Calm. Like someone carrying heavy responsibilities without making a performance out of it. Some nights she checked her phone between customers with this quiet, worried expression adults get when they're balancing too many things at once. One night, while handing me my drink, she apologized for looking distracted. My son has a school project tomorrow, she explained. And apparently fifth graders wait until midnight to remember they need supplies. I laughed. Future leadership skills. Future stress management problems, she replied immediately. That was the first time we talked like actual friends instead of customer and cashier. And honestly, it scared me a little. Because after heartbreak, your brain becomes emotionally suspicious. Even kindness feels dangerous. You start analyzing simple interactions like a detective investigating emotional crime scenes. Why is this person being nice to me? Do they actually care? Am I imagining connection because I'm lonely? Human beings after emotional pain become deeply weird creatures. But slowly, the cafe stopped feeling like just a coffee shop. It became the one place where my nervous system relaxed. I started staying later after work, reading books I barely focused on, mostly listening to quiet conversations around me. Some evenings she sat for a few minutes during breaks and talked with me while folding napkins or organizing receipts. Tiny conversations. But meaningful ones. One night we talked about American culture. I admitted something embarrassing. When people here say let's hang out sometime, I never know if they actually mean it. She laughed so hard she almost dropped a stack of cups. Honestly? Sometimes Americans don't know either. Then she explained something that completely changed how I understood social life in the United States. A lot of people here are friendly, she said. But not always emotionally available. That sentence stayed in my head for days. Because it was true. American culture can feel warm and distant at the exact same time. People smile. They compliment strangers. They ask how your day is going. But emotionally, many adults keep invisible walls around themselves. Partly because life here is busy. Partly because people are tired. And partly because vulnerability scares almost everyone. Including me. Especially me. One snowy evening, the cafe was unusually quiet. Just soft jazz music playing in the background and the sound of milk steaming behind the counter. She sat across from me during her break holding a paper cup of tea. You always come here alone, she said casually. I smiled awkwardly. Yeah. I guess I do. Then she asked a question nobody had asked me in a long time. Are you okay? Not the automatic how are you? People throw around without listening. A real question. And honestly? I almost lied. Because adults become experts at lying about emotions. We say I'm fine the same way people click I agree on terms and conditions without reading anything. But something about that moment felt different. So for the first time in months, I answered honestly. Not really. The cafe suddenly felt very quiet. I stared down at my coffee cup while explaining pieces of my life. The breakup. The exhaustion. Feeling lost. Feeling disconnected from myself. feeling like I had failed at building the life I imagined in America. And she listened. That's it. No dramatic advice. No motivational speech. No fake positivity. Just listening. Do you know how rare that is now? Most people listen while waiting for their turn to talk. But emotionally intelligent people listen to understand. And somehow, being heard made me feel lighter. There's neuroscience behind this too. Studies show that emotionally supportive conversations reduce cortisol levels, the stress hormone, and help regulate the nervous system. In simple terms, feeling emotionally safe literally changes your brain chemistry. Which explains why that conversation stayed with me long after I drove home that night. Over the next few weeks, something unexpected happened. I started laughing again. Not fake polite laughter. Real laughter. The kind that catches you off guard. One night I accidentally knocked over my coffee while trying to sound intelligent during a conversation about books. She stared at the mess and deadpanned. Very powerful literary analysis. I laughed so hard people looked over from nearby tables. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. I liked her. Not because she was perfect. Not because she saved me. But because around her, I felt more like myself again. And honestly, after emotional failure, that feeling becomes incredibly addictive. Still, part of me resisted it. Because heartbreak changes your instincts. You start believing happiness is temporary. You expect disappointment before good things even fully begin. Your brain tries protecting you by assuming the worst possible outcome. Psychologists call this emotional self-protection after trauma. I called it exhausting. So even while growing closer to her, part of me kept waiting for something to go wrong. And eventually, something did. But not in the way I expected. Love is nothing like the movies. Movies lied to us. Not completely. Just enough to make real relationships feel confusing when they finally happen. Movies tell you love arrives dramatically. Two people lock eyes across a crowded room. Music plays. Problems disappear. Everybody suddenly becomes emotionally confident with perfect timing and attractive lighting. Real love in America at 30 years old looks very different. Real love looks like two exhausted adults texting each other at 10:47 p.m. about whether they remembered to pay the electricity bill. And honestly, that's where things started becoming real between us. By then, I had been visiting the cafe for months. Winter was slowly fading, though the cold still lingered in the mornings like it had unfinished business. The snow on sidewalks turned gray and slushy. People looked slightly less miserable outside. Even the sunlight seemed more confident. And somehow, my life felt a little lighter too. Not fixed. Not magically healed. Just less heavy. One evening, I stayed late at the cafe helping her stack chairs before closing. Nothing romantic. Just two tired adults cleaning up after another long workday. You don't have to help, she said while wiping down tables. I know, I replied. But your chair stacking system is emotionally inspiring. She laughed. You really need more hobbies. That became our rhythm. Small jokes. Slow conversations. Comfort. And maybe that's the first thing nobody explains properly about healthy relationships after failure. Comfort becomes more attractive than excitement. When you've survived emotional chaos, peace feels luxurious. One night after closing, she asked if I wanted to grab food from a small diner nearby. Very casual. Very normal. Which somehow made me more nervous than an official date would have. I spent 15 minutes changing jackets before leaving my apartment like some emotionally unstable fashion consultant. The diner was quiet except for the sound of old country music and exhausted waitresses carrying coffee pots like emotional support equipment. We sat near the window. And for the first time, we talked outside the coffee shop. Really talked. That's when I learned more about her life. She had been divorced for 3 years. 2 kids. Constant stress. Work during evenings. Parenting during mornings. Sleep whenever the universe allowed it. She explained all this while casually eating fries like she was describing weather patterns. And suddenly I realized something important. Adult life in America is incredibly hard for a lot of people. Especially parents. Especially single parents. Especially people trying to appear emotionally functional while internally surviving on caffeine and determination. At one point she laughed and said, "Honestly, some days I feel like I'm one unpaid bill away from becoming a motivational podcast." That sentence nearly killed me. Because humor is how exhausted adults communicate emotional pain without fully collapsing. The more we talked, the more I noticed something refreshing about her. She wasn't pretending. No fake perfection. No social media personality. No performance. Just honesty. And after months of emotionally shallow interactions with people pretending life was always amazing, her honesty felt strangely beautiful. Then something happened that caught me completely off guard. She asked me why my last relationship ended. Now, emotionally healthy adults probably answer this calmly. I did not. My brain immediately started acting like an emergency meeting had been called inside my nervous system. Because heartbreak leaves emotional fingerprints on people. Even after time passes, certain questions reopen old insecurities surprisingly fast. I looked down at my coffee for a second before answering. I paused. I spent too much time trying to become the version of myself other people needed. She nodded slowly. That's exhausting. And somehow, hearing someone understand something you struggled to explain to yourself feels incredibly intimate. There's actually psychological research about this. Emotional intimacy forms faster when people feel understood without needing to over-explain themselves. The human brain associates emotional safety with connection. Basically, your nervous system relaxes around people who make you feel emotionally seen. That's exactly what was happening to me. But here's where things became complicated. Because real relationships don't just involve emotions. They involve fear. And mine was growing quietly in the background. Not fear of her. Fear of losing another version of my future. You see, after failure, people don't just become cautious. They become hyper-aware. You analyze text messages too much. You notice tiny changes in tone. You overthink pauses. Your brain starts treating emotional attachment like a risky financial investment. One evening she took longer than usual to reply to my message. 4 hours. That's it. Completely normal adult behavior. She was working. Raising children. Existing as a human being with responsibilities. Meanwhile, my brain transformed into a conspiracy documentary. Maybe she's losing interest. Maybe I said something wrong. Maybe I imagined all of this. Amazing how quickly insecurity can turn intelligent adults into emotionally confused detectives. When she finally replied, her message simply said, "Sorry. Crazy day. My daughter had a fever." And immediately I felt ridiculous. That was another thing love started teaching me. Not every silence means rejection. Sometimes people are just tired. Sometimes life is simply difficult. That realization changed something inside me. Because modern relationships are full of emotional overreaction. Social media trained people to expect constant validation, instant replies, endless attention. But real adult relationships don't work like that. Real love often looks boring from the outside. Consistency. Patience. Showing up. Asking if somebody ate dinner. Driving 30 minutes because their day was terrible. Remembering how they take their coffee. That's real intimacy. Not dramatic speeches in the rain. One Saturday afternoon, she invited me to a local park where her kids were playing soccer. And honestly, I almost said no. Not because I didn't want to go. Because it suddenly felt serious. Meeting someone's children changes the emotional atmosphere immediately. Your brain stops treating the relationship like a casual possibility and starts realizing actual lives are involved. I remember standing near the soccer field holding terrible overpriced coffee while pretending not to panic internally. Then I saw her walking toward me with her kids. And for the first time in a very long time, something inside me felt hopeful. Not wildly happy. Not unrealistically optimistic. Just hopeful. Quietly hopeful. Which might actually be stronger. But life has strange timing. Because right when I started believing things were finally improving, America reminded me how fragile stability can be. And one phone call was about to change everything again. The things nobody warns you about in America. There's a strange moment that happens to many adults living in the United States. From the outside, your life starts looking stable. You're working. Paying bills. Driving to work. Buying groceries. Answering emails. Smiling at people. Functioning. But internally, it still feels like your entire life is balancing on one unstable wooden chair from a discount furniture store. That was exactly where I was emotionally when the phone call came. It happened on a Tuesday morning while I was at work. Nothing dramatic at first. Just my manager asking me to step into his office. Which, in corporate America, immediately activates survival instincts stronger than ancient cavemen hearing noises in the dark. My first thought? I'm getting fired. Because honestly, fear becomes automatic when you've already experienced enough emotional instability. But instead, he explained the company was restructuring operations. That's corporate language for, something bad is happening, but we'd like to sound professional while ruining your week. My hours were being reduced. Not completely unemployed. Not technically terrible. But bad enough. Less hours. Less income. Same rent. Same bills. Same responsibilities. And suddenly that fragile stability I had slowly rebuilt started shaking again. I drove home that evening with the radio off. That's how you know adults are stressed. Silence replaces music. Outside, spring had finally started arriving. Trees were turning green again. Restaurants were setting tables outside. Couples walked through downtown looking emotionally coordinated. Meanwhile, my brain was performing financial calculations powerful enough to qualify for NASA training. Rent, car insurance, gas, groceries, phone bill, electricity, health insurance. The beautiful American tradition of paying enormous amounts of money simply to continue existing. Nobody truly understands adult financial anxiety in America until they experience it personally. Even people with jobs often live under constant pressure because everything feels expensive all the time. And stress changes people. Science proves this too. Chronic financial stress increases cortisol levels, disrupts sleep, weakens concentration, and makes emotional regulation harder. Basically, your brain starts operating like a phone overheating in direct sunlight. Which explained why I suddenly felt emotionally exhausted again after months of improvement. That night, I almost didn't go to the cafe. Part of me wanted to isolate again. That's what stressed humans often do. When life becomes overwhelming, the brain sometimes treats isolation as protection. But isolation is sneaky. It feels safe while quietly making everything worse. So I went anyway. The cafe smelled like cinnamon and coffee beans. Soft indie music played in the background. People typed on laptops pretending not to overhear each other's conversations. Normal life. I sat down near the window, probably looking emotionally defeated because she noticed immediately. "You okay?" And there it was again. That question. Simple words that somehow bypassed all my emotional defenses. I tried giving a casual answer. "Work stuff." She leaned against the counter. "Bad work stuff?" I nodded. Then, for the next 20 minutes, I explained everything. Reduced hours. Money stress. Fear. The feeling that every time life starts improving, something arrives to destabilize it again. And after listening quietly, she said something that completely changed the way I viewed adulthood in America. Nobody here feels as stable as they look. I stared at her. She continued cleaning cups while talking calmly. Seriously. People are struggling everywhere. They just hide it because everybody thinks they're supposed to look successful all the time. That sentence hit hard. Because American culture is deeply connected to performance. Success. Productivity. Achievement. People post vacation photos while drowning in debt. They smile at work while battling anxiety attacks in parking lots. They say living the dream while emotionally surviving on caffeine and denial. And social media makes this worse. You compare your worst moments to everybody else's highlight reel and wonder why your life feels broken. One evening a few days later, she invited me to eat dinner with her and the kids after her shift. Not fancy. Frozen lasagna. Garlic bread. Juice boxes on the kitchen counter. Real life. And honestly, that dinner affected me more than expensive restaurants ever could. Her son talked non-stop about video games. Her daughter asked me if I liked American pancakes. At one point somebody spilled juice and nobody reacted dramatically because apparently exhausted parents stop fearing small disasters after surviving larger ones. The apartment felt noisy, messy, alive. And suddenly I realized something uncomfortable. I missed this kind of energy. Not perfection. Not luxury. Just human warmth. Psychologists often say emotional healing doesn't happen through grand transformations. It happens through repeated experiences of safety, connection, and belonging. That dinner was one of those experiences. For the first time in years, I didn't feel emotionally alone while eating. And that scared me slightly. Because attachment always carries risk. The more connected you feel, the more you fear losing it. Later that night, while helping wash dishes, I asked her something I'd been wondering for weeks. How do you stay positive all the time? She laughed immediately. Oh, I'm not positive all the time. Then she dried a plate slowly before continuing. I've just learned that bad seasons don't last forever. That sentence stayed with me. Bad seasons don't last forever. Simple. But powerful. Especially when life convinces you temporary pain is permanent. Over the next few weeks, I became closer with her children too. And strangely enough, they helped my English improve more naturally than anything else ever had. Kids speak directly. Clearly. Honestly. No complicated business vocabulary. No social performance. One afternoon her daughter corrected my pronunciation of the word squirrel for nearly 5 straight minutes while laughing uncontrollably. To be fair, squirrel sounds fake even to native English speakers. But moments like that mattered. Because slowly, English stopped feeling like a test. It started feeling like connection. And somewhere between family dinners, stressful workdays, coffee shop conversations, and small ordinary moments, I began imagining a future again. Which was dangerous. Because hope makes people vulnerable. And life has a strange habit of testing people right after they finally start feeling safe. A week later, I got another phone call. This one happened late at night. And after answering it, I sat completely frozen in silence. Because suddenly, everything I had rebuilt felt uncertain all over again. The dinner that changed everything. There are phone calls that interrupt your day. And then there are phone calls that interrupt the version of yourself you were slowly becoming. This one happened close to midnight. I was sitting on my couch half watching a documentary I couldn't focus on when my phone rang. Her name appeared on the screen. Immediately, something felt wrong. Not because of logic. Because humans notice emotional patterns before they consciously understand them. Tiny changes in timing, tone, energy. Your nervous system often recognizes tension before your brain catches up. I answered quickly. Her voice sounded tight. My son is in the emergency room. Every muscle in my body locked instantly. Apparently children are very talented at getting injured in the most terrifying ways possible. He had fallen badly during basketball practice. Possible concussion. Doctors still checking. I grabbed my keys before she even finished explaining. The hospital parking lot was almost empty when I arrived. Bright lights reflected against wet pavement from earlier rain. Everything smelled faintly like disinfectant and exhaustion, the universal scent of hospitals everywhere. Inside the waiting area, she looked completely drained. Hair messy. Eyes red. Still trying to stay calm because parents don't really get the luxury of emotional collapse during emergencies. The moment she saw me, something in her expression softened slightly. And weirdly, that tiny reaction affected me more than I expected. Because for the first time, I realized she trusted me enough to call. Not because I could fix the situation. Just because she didn't want to face it alone. That changes people. We sat there together for hours. Hospitals are strange places emotionally. Time moves differently inside them. Minutes stretch longer. Conversations become quieter. People suddenly stop pretending small things matter. At around 2 in the morning, her son was finally okay. Mild concussion. Scary, but manageable. Relief hit the room like everyone had been holding their breath at the same time. And that's when something happened I'll never forget. Her son looked at me and asked, "Are you staying for breakfast tomorrow?" Such a simple question. But emotionally, it landed like a truck. Because children accidentally reveal truths adults avoid saying directly. I looked at her. She smiled tiredly and shrugged slightly. "If you want to." And suddenly this relationship stopped feeling temporary. That terrified me. Not because I didn't care about them. Because I cared more than I expected. There's something psychologically intense about becoming emotionally attached to people after a period of loneliness. Your brain starts rebuilding hope, trust, and future thinking all at once. But with hope comes fear. Fear of loss. Fear of failure. Fear that happiness might disappear the second you finally believe in it. The next evening, I went to their apartment for dinner. Nothing fancy. Soup. Bread. Cartoons playing quietly in the background. But emotionally, the atmosphere felt different now. Warmer. More personal. At one point her daughter handed me a drawing she made earlier that day. It showed 4 stick figures standing together outside a house. One of them was apparently me. Children will emotionally humble you without warning. I stared at that drawing way longer than necessary. Because suddenly I realized something uncomfortable. I was becoming part of their routine. And routines are dangerous when you've spent years emotionally preparing for disappointment. Dinner that night was loud, chaotic, slightly disorganized, and honestly kind of perfect. Her son argued passionately about why pineapple belongs on pizza. Her daughter accidentally dropped noodles on the floor. She apologized 3 separate times for the apartment being messy while simultaneously trying to help with homework and cook. And somewhere in the middle of all that noise, I had a strange thought. This feels more real than anything I've experienced in years. Not polished. Not impressive. Real. That's the thing movies rarely show about love after failure. It's not dramatic. It's deeply ordinary. And that's exactly why it becomes meaningful. Later that night, after the kids finally fell asleep, we sat quietly in the kitchen drinking tea. No music. No television. Just silence that felt comfortable instead of lonely. Then she asked me something unexpected. "Do you ever feel guilty for being happy again?" That question hit me harder than she probably realized. Because yes. Absolutely yes. After painful experiences, happiness can feel suspicious. Almost irresponsible. Like your brain doesn't fully trust good moments anymore. Psychologists sometimes call this post-traumatic guarding. After emotional pain, people remain mentally prepared for disaster even during peaceful moments. Your nervous system keeps waiting for the next problem. I admitted that to her. And she nodded slowly. I think adults carry old heartbreaks longer than they admit. That sentence stayed in my head for days. Because adult heartbreak isn't loud most of the time. It's subtle. It changes how long you hesitate before trusting someone. It changes how quickly you apologize. It changes how often you mentally prepare for abandonment before it even happens. And honestly, America can intensify that feeling. life here moves fast. Relationships often compete with work schedules, financial pressure, stress, parenting responsibilities, and emotional exhaustion. Many adults barely have enough energy left at the end of the day to process their own feelings properly. That's why emotional safety becomes rare and valuable. At some point during our conversation, she laughed softly and said, "You know what's funny?" "What?" "You looked terrified the first time you ordered coffee." I covered my face immediately. "To be fair, your menu was emotionally overwhelming." She laughed so hard she almost spilled tea. Then she looked at me for a second longer than usual. "You seem different now." That scared me too. Because she was right. I was changing. Slowly. The anxious, emotionally disconnected version of myself that sat alone in a freezing apartment months earlier no longer felt entirely familiar. I still had stress. Still had uncertainty. Still had fears about money, work, relationships, and the future. But something fundamental had shifted. I wanted to participate in life again. And honestly, after emotional burnout, wanting life again is a massive victory. Before leaving that night, I helped clean the kitchen. At one point, while drying dishes beside her, our hands accidentally touched. Tiny moment. But emotionally enormous. Because for the first time in a very long while, physical closeness didn't make me anxious. It felt safe. Comfortable. Human. Then she looked at me quietly and said, "You know, the kids really like you." My heart immediately forgot how to behave normally. Because suddenly this wasn't just about attraction anymore. This was about responsibility. Presence. Consistency. Real life. And standing there in that small kitchen, holding a dish towel like an emotionally confused adult in a low-budget romance movie, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't afraid of being alone anymore. I was afraid of losing this. And unfortunately, life was about to test that fear very soon. The night I almost walked away. There's a specific kind of exhaustion adults rarely talk about. Not physical exhaustion. Not the kind sleep fixes. I mean the deeper kind, the emotional burnout that happens when life keeps demanding energy you no longer know how to produce. That was where I found myself a few weeks later. And honestly, everything looked fine from the outside. That's the dangerous part. I was spending more time with her and the kids. Work was still stressful, but manageable. Spring had fully arrived in the city. Trees were green again. Sidewalk cafes were crowded. People walked dogs like they had emotionally stable lives. Meanwhile, inside my head, anxiety quietly returned like an unpaid subscription nobody remembered signing up for. It started small. Trouble sleeping. Overthinking. Constant worry about money. Fear about the future. Then came the exhaustion. You ever wake up tired even after sleeping 8 hours? That's usually not a body problem. That's a nervous system problem. Psychologists call it chronic stress overload. When your brain stays in survival mode too long, it becomes harder to relax even during peaceful moments. Your body keeps acting like danger is nearby. That was me. One evening after work, I sat alone in my car outside my apartment complex for almost 40 minutes. Didn't move. Didn't check my phone. Just stared through the windshield while the engine ticked softly in the dark. And for the first time in months, old thoughts started returning. Maybe I'm not ready for this. Maybe I'm going to ruin everything. Maybe people like me don't really get happy endings. It's amazing how quickly fear can rewrite your entire perspective. Earlier that same day, my manager had announced more possible company changes. Nothing confirmed yet. Just uncertainty. But uncertainty is enough. Human brains hate uncertainty more than bad news sometimes. At least bad news gives your mind something solid to process. Uncertainty leaves the imagination unsupervised. And the imagination is emotionally dramatic. I remember sitting in that car watching people walk into their apartments carrying groceries, talking on phones, laughing about ordinary things. Everybody looked normal. Stable. Meanwhile, I felt like one unexpected problem away from emotionally collapsing inside a gas station convenience store. Adult anxiety is deeply unglamorous. Eventually my phone buzzed. A message from her. You coming over tonight? I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. And then I typed something terrible. I think maybe we should slow things down. The moment I hit send, my stomach dropped. Because sometimes people sabotage good things not because they want to leave, but because they're terrified of staying. There's real psychology behind this too. People who've experienced emotional pain often develop avoidance patterns when relationships become serious. The brain mistakes vulnerability for danger. Basically, your nervous system starts pulling emergency exits during emotionally meaningful moments. A minute later, my phone rang. I almost ignored it. But I answered. Her voice was calm. Can you come here? That was it. No yelling. No emotional speech. Just 4 quiet words. So I drove there. The entire drive felt surreal. Streetlights blurred against the windshield while my brain replayed every fear I had about relationships, failure, and disappointing people. By the time I arrived, I was emotionally exhausted before even walking through the door. She opened it slowly. The kids were asleep. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the dishwasher in the kitchen. And suddenly I realized something terrifying. This place had started feeling like home to me. We sat at the kitchen table in silence for a moment. Then she looked at me directly and asked, "What's really going on?" Not "Why did you text that?" Not "Are you breaking up with me?" Just, "What's really going on?" And honestly, that question broke something open inside me. Because I was tired. Tired of pretending I always had everything under control. Tired of acting emotionally strong. Tired of carrying fear around like invisible luggage. So I finally admitted the truth. I told her I was scared. Scared of financial instability. Scared of failing again. Scared of becoming important to people and then disappointing them. Scared that life would eventually take this happiness away anyway. The words came out messier than I intended. Half confessions. Half exhausted emotional honesty. And she listened quietly the entire time. Then she said something I still think about today. You keep acting like love is something you have to earn by being perfect. Silence. Because suddenly every emotional defense mechanism inside me felt painfully visible. She continued softly. You're allowed to struggle sometimes. That sentence hit harder than any motivational speech ever could. Because modern adult life trains people to believe they must constantly perform competence. Especially men. especially people carrying emotional scars. You learn to hide weakness because you think vulnerability makes you less valuable. But emotional connection doesn't grow through perfection. It grows through honesty. Psychologists often say secure relationships are built when people feel emotionally safe enough to reveal imperfect parts of themselves without fear of rejection. And in that moment, sitting at her kitchen table under dim yellow light while exhausted from life and fear and overthinking, I finally understood what emotional safety actually felt like. Not excitement. Not obsession. Safety. There's a huge difference. After a while, she stood up and made tea while I sat there mentally recovering from my own emotional breakdown. Then, from the hallway, her son appeared half asleep holding a blanket. Apparently children possess supernatural abilities to sense emotional tension at exactly the wrong time. He looked at me and asked, "Are you staying tomorrow too?" Simple question. Tiny voice. But emotionally devastating. Because suddenly I realized something important. Leaving wouldn't only hurt me anymore. Relationships become real when your decisions begin affecting other people emotionally. That responsibility scared me. But strangely, it also grounded me. That night we stayed up talking until almost 2 in the morning. About stress, fear, American work culture, money pressure, relationships, mental exhaustion. And somewhere during those quiet hours, I realized adulthood isn't about becoming fearless. It's about learning how to stay even when fear appears. Before I left, she walked me to the door. Then she smiled slightly and said, "You know what your problem is?" "What?" "You think bad days mean bad lives." I laughed quietly. Because she was right. One difficult season had convinced me disaster was permanent. But life doesn't move in straight lines. People struggle, recover, fall apart, heal, repeat. That's adulthood. And driving home that night, something inside me felt calmer. Not because my problems disappeared. My job situation still existed. Bills still existed. Stress still existed. But for the first time, I stopped seeing myself as someone permanently broken by failure. And weirdly enough, that changed everything. The kids changed me more than English ever did. Nobody tells you this about children. They notice the version of you that adults ignore. Adults usually pay attention to achievements. Your job. Your income. Your confidence. Your communication skills. The polished parts. Kids don't care about any of that. Children pay attention to energy. Patience. Presence. Whether you actually listen when they talk about dinosaurs for 20 straight minutes with the seriousness of a government briefing. And somehow, without realizing it, her kids slowly changed me more than any self-help book or motivational video ever could. It started with small things. Saturday mornings. Cartoons playing too loudly. Pancakes slightly burned because somebody got distracted. Her daughter insisting I pronounce difficult English words while her son laughed like it was a professional comedy show. To be fair, English pronunciation is emotionally aggressive sometimes. One afternoon we were reading a children's book together at the kitchen table. Simple sentences. Simple vocabulary. Nothing impressive. But halfway through the story, I noticed something strange. I wasn't translating English inside my head anymore. I was just understanding. Naturally. And weirdly enough, that moment almost felt emotional. Because for so long, English had represented pressure in my life. Work pressure. Communication anxiety. Fear of mistakes. Fear of embarrassment. But sitting there reading stories about talking animals and superheroes with two kids who genuinely did not care about my accent, English suddenly felt human again. That's something language experts talk about a lot now. Emotional state directly affects language learning. When people feel relaxed and emotionally safe, the brain processes and remembers language more naturally. Fear blocks learning. Connection improves it. Which honestly explains why I improved more during random family moments than during hours of formal study. One Sunday afternoon, her son challenged me to a video game competition. Huge mistake. Apparently 10-year-olds in America now possess reaction speeds that defy biology. I lost repeatedly. Violently. Humiliatingly. At one point he looked at me and said, "You play like somebody's uncle." I'm still emotionally recovering from that sentence. But somewhere between laughing, arguing about game rules, and pretending I wasn't deeply offended by a child, I realized something important. I had started feeling comfortable again. Not just with them. With myself. That's a massive difference. Because after emotional failure, many people don't only lose confidence in relationships. They lose comfort in their own personality. You become cautious. Filtered. Emotionally restrained. Like your real self became too risky to fully show again. But children destroy emotional performances naturally. They ask direct questions adults avoid. One evening while eating pizza, her daughter suddenly asked, "Why were you sad when we first met you?" Silence. Even the pizza suddenly felt emotionally unprepared. Adults immediately panic during moments like this because children accidentally bypass social defenses with terrifying efficiency. I looked at her carefully. "Sometimes adults go through hard seasons," I said. She nodded thoughtfully while chewing pizza. Then she said something that completely stunned me. "My mom says hard seasons end." I looked over at her mother standing in the kitchen. She smiled quietly. And honestly, that simple moment hit me harder than most deep conversations. Because healing often happens through repetition. Hearing hopeful truths again and again until your nervous system finally believes them. Hard seasons end. Simple sentence. Powerful effect. Over time, I became more involved in everyday life with them. Helping with homework. Picking up groceries. School events. Movie nights where everybody argued for 20 minutes before choosing something nobody actually wanted to watch. Normal family chaos. And strangely, that normalcy healed parts of me I didn't realize were wounded. Psychologists sometimes explain trauma recovery this way. People heal not only through emotional insight, but through repeated experiences of stability and connection. Basically, your nervous system relearns safety through ordinary moments. That's what was happening to me. Not dramatic transformation. Quiet rebuilding. One night after dinner, her son asked me to help with a school project about families. Again, emotionally dangerous territory. He sat beside me at the table coloring while explaining the assignment. Then casually, without warning, he asked, "Are you gonna stay with us for a long time?" There it was. The question. Children ask terrifying emotional questions with the confidence of tiny philosophers. I didn't answer immediately. Because honestly, part of me was still afraid to promise anything permanent. Not because I wanted to leave. Because life had taught me how quickly things can change. But then I looked around the apartment. The dishes drying near the sink. Her daughter asleep on the couch. Her laughing quietly while searching for glue sticks in a kitchen drawer. And I realized something important. For months, I had been treating happiness like something temporary. Like it could disappear any second if I relaxed too much. That's what emotional survival mode does. It teaches people to expect loss before fully enjoying connection. But maybe healing means allowing yourself to believe good things can stay too. So I looked at him and smiled. I hope so. And his reaction nearly destroyed me emotionally. He simply nodded like that answer was enough. No dramatic moment. No speech. Just trust. Children trust slowly sometimes. But when they do, it feels incredibly important. Later that evening, after the kids were asleep, I sat outside on the apartment balcony with her. Warm spring air. Distant traffic sounds. The city glowing softly in the background. She leaned back in her chair and looked at me for a second. You're different now. I laughed quietly. You said that before. No, she replied softly. I mean really different. And maybe she was right. Months earlier, I was emotionally isolated, exhausted, and convinced failure had ruined my future. Now I was sitting outside with people who genuinely cared whether I showed up tomorrow. That changes a person. Not perfectly. Not instantly. But deeply. Then she asked me something unexpected. Do you ever think about what your life would look like if everything had gone according to your original plan? I thought about it for a while. Then I answered honestly. I don't think I would have become this version of myself. And for the first time, I truly meant it. Because maybe failure didn't destroy my life. Maybe it interrupted a version of life that was never meant to make me happy in the first place. And strangely enough, that realization felt like freedom. Marriage is more than love. Most people think relationships become easier after love feels secure. That's adorable. Real adult relationships don't suddenly become simple because two people care about each other. In fact, emotional closeness often reveals problems more clearly. Love doesn't magically erase stress, personality differences, exhaustion, habits, trauma, or the deeply confusing ways human beings react under pressure. And honestly, that's exactly what happened to us. By the time summer arrived, our lives had become deeply connected. I wasn't just visiting anymore. I was helping with school pickups, fixing random things around the apartment, grocery shopping on weekends, and accidentally becoming emotionally invested in whether there was enough milk in the refrigerator. Which, apparently, is one of the earliest signs of adulthood fully taking over your personality. But somewhere between comfort and routine, reality quietly entered the relationship. Not dramatic reality. Ordinary reality. The dangerous kind. One evening we argued about something unbelievably stupid. Laundry. Specifically, where wet towels should go. That was it. No betrayal. No giant relationship crisis. Just two exhausted adults standing in a kitchen having entirely too many emotions about bathroom towels. And somehow, within 4 minutes, the conversation expanded into stress about responsibilities, exhaustion, schedules, communication. And who felt emotionally overwhelmed lately? Amazing how fast adults can emotionally improvise conflict from household objects. At one point she crossed her arms and said, "You always try to fix problems instead of just listening." That sentence hit me immediately because she was right. A lot of men are raised to approach emotions like broken furniture. Identify issue. Solve issue. Move on. But emotional support doesn't always work that way. Sometimes people don't want solutions. They want understanding. Unfortunately, emotionally confused adults often learn this information mid-argument while internally panicking. So there we were, standing in silence. Both tired. Both frustrated. And both secretly wondering if this tiny argument meant something bigger was wrong. Psychologists actually explain this phenomenon really well. In close relationships, small conflicts often trigger deeper fears beneath the surface. The argument is rarely about towels, dishes, or text messages. It's about feeling unseen, unsupported, or emotionally disconnected. Basically, your nervous system turns ordinary moments into emotional documentaries. The strange thing was, a younger version of me would have emotionally shut down completely right there. Old me avoided conflict. Old me assumed arguments meant relationships were failing. Old me treated emotional tension like a fire alarm. But healing changes how people respond to discomfort. Not perfectly. Just enough. So instead of leaving, I stayed. And for the first time in my adult life, I tried something radically terrifying. I listened. Not to defend myself. Not to prepare counterarguments. Actually listened. She explained how exhausting it felt carrying invisible responsibilities constantly. Managing schedules. Thinking ahead. Remembering small details for the kids. Working. Parenting. Handling emotional labor nobody notices until it stops happening. And honestly, I had underestimated that pressure completely. That's something many people quietly struggle with in American family life. Modern adulthood demands constant mental energy. Bills, work schedules, appointments, school events, groceries, emotional support, planning for the future, it never fully stops. People aren't weak. They're overloaded. And overloaded people sometimes snap over wet towels. Eventually, the tension softened. Not because we magically solved everything. Because we understood each other better. That night, after the kids were asleep, we sat together on the couch in exhausted silence. Then she laughed quietly. You know what's funny? What? We just had a serious emotional discussion because of fabric. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled water. And somehow, that became one of the healthiest moments in our relationship. Because real intimacy isn't avoiding conflict. It's learning how to survive it together. That realization changed me deeply. Growing up, I thought successful relationships meant people rarely argued. But psychologically, healthy couples still disagree. The difference is how they repair emotional connection afterward. Repair matters more than perfection. That became our rhythm. Not flawless happiness. Real partnership. Some days were beautiful. Others were stressful. There were mornings when everybody overslept and the apartment felt like a low-budget disaster movie. There were financial worries. parenting stress, exhaustion, work problems. Moments where both of us felt emotionally stretched thin. But slowly, we stopped seeing problems as me versus you. It became us versus the problem. And honestly, that mindset shift might save more relationships than romance ever does. One evening during late summer, we attended a neighborhood barbecue together. Completely ordinary suburban American experience. Paper plates. Children running everywhere. Somebody aggressively overcooking hamburgers while pretending it was intentional. At one point, one of the neighbors casually asked how long we'd been married. I almost corrected him automatically. But before I could answer, she looked at me and smiled. We're working on it. That sentence stayed in my head all night. Not because of pressure. Because for the first time, the future no longer scared me the same way. Months earlier, commitment felt dangerous. Now it felt possible. Still scary. But possible. And maybe that's what emotional healing actually looks like, not becoming fearless, but becoming willing. Willing to trust. Willing to stay. Willing to believe your life isn't permanently ruined by past failures. A few weeks later, after the kids had gone to sleep, we sat at the kitchen table talking quietly about the future. Where we wanted to live someday. What kind of life we wanted for the kids. How exhausting adulthood felt sometimes. Then she suddenly asked me, "Do you ever regret what happened before we met?" I thought carefully before answering. Because for a long time, I did regret it. The heartbreak. The loneliness. The failure. The emotional collapse. All of it. But now? I shook my head slowly. No, I admitted. I hate what it felt like, but not where it led me. She looked at me quietly for a second. Then smiled. And in that moment, sitting in a slightly messy kitchen surrounded by unpaid bills, half-finished tea, and the ordinary chaos of adult life in America, I realized something shocking. This wasn't the life I originally planned. It was better. Not easier. Not perfect. Better. And for the first time in years, the future stopped feeling like something to survive. It started feeling like something I actually wanted to reach. The peaceful life I once thought was impossible. You know what nobody tells you about happiness? Most of the time, it looks incredibly ordinary. Not cinematic. Not dramatic. Not the kind of life people post online with motivational captions and perfect lighting. Real happiness often looks like folding laundry together while somebody burns garlic bread in the oven. And honestly, that realization changed my entire understanding of success. By autumn, our lives had blended together so naturally that sometimes I forgot how emotionally lost I used to feel. The apartment that once felt temporary now carried the small fingerprints of shared routines. Shoes near the door. School schedules stuck to the refrigerator. Children arguing about cereal at 7 in the morning like it was an international political debate. Tiny ordinary details. But psychologically, routines create emotional stability. Human brains relax when life becomes predictable in healthy ways. After long periods of stress or loneliness, even simple habits can feel deeply healing. That's what was happening to me. Healing wasn't arriving as one giant breakthrough moment. It was arriving quietly. Slowly. In pieces. One Saturday morning, I woke up earlier than everyone else. The apartment was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator and distant traffic outside. Soft autumn sunlight came through the kitchen window while coffee brewed in the background. And suddenly I noticed something strange. I felt calm. Not distracted. Not anxious. Not emotionally preparing for disaster. Just calm. That may sound small to some people, but after spending years living in survival mode, peace feels almost suspicious at first. Your nervous system doesn't immediately trust it. For a long time, I kept waiting for life to fall apart again. That's what emotionally exhausted people do. They become experts at anticipating problems. Hypervigilance becomes a survival skill. But over time, my brain slowly stopped expecting catastrophe every 5 minutes. Not because life became perfect. Because I no longer faced everything alone. That changes people more than they realize. One evening during dinner, her daughter asked everyone to say one good thing about their day. Apparently this was now a family tradition. Her son said recess lasted longer than usual. She said a customer at work tipped $50. Then they looked at me. And honestly? Months earlier, I probably would have given some vague answer. But this time, I answered truthfully. My good thing is this. Silence. Then her daughter smiled proudly like she personally organized the emotional moment herself. Children are unintentionally powerful sometimes. Later that night, while helping clean dishes, she leaned against the counter and asked, "You seem happier lately." I laughed quietly. I think my nervous system finally realized we're not in danger. She smiled. That's actually kind of sad. And weirdly enough, she was right. Because many adults spend years functioning under constant stress without realizing how deeply it affects them. Psychologists explain that prolonged stress changes the brain's threat detection system. Eventually, your body becomes so used to tension that peace feels unfamiliar. Basically, your brain accidentally turns survival mode into a personality trait. That sentence haunted me a little. Because I realized how long I had lived that way. Always preparing emotionally. Always expecting loss. Always assuming happiness would disappear eventually. But now? Life felt different. Still busy. Still imperfect. Still full of responsibilities. But emotionally different. One afternoon we took the kids to a pumpkin festival outside the city. Very American experience. Hayrides. Apple cider. Children covered in mysterious sticky substances. People taking thousands of seasonal photos like autumn personally hired them for marketing campaigns. At one point, while walking through the crowded farm, her son grabbed my hand without thinking. Simple gesture. Tiny moment. But emotionally? It hit me hard. Because human connection becomes most powerful in moments people don't plan. That unconscious trust meant more to me than dramatic declarations ever could. Later, while the kids were distracted by caramel apples the size of bowling balls, she stood beside me watching them run around. Then quietly she asked, "Do you ever miss your old life?" Interesting question. Because for a long time, I thought I would. The old dreams. The old plans. The version of my future I once imagined. But standing there surrounded by cold autumn air, laughing children. And the strangely comforting smell of cinnamon and coffee. I realized something important. I didn't miss my old life. I missed the idea of certainty. That's different. People often think they want perfect plans. What they actually want is emotional safety. And strangely enough, I finally found that not through control, but through connection. One night after the kids fell asleep, we sat together watching rain hit the windows. The apartment lights were dim. Everybody was tired. The kind of tired that comes from real life instead of emotional crisis. Comfortable tired. Then she asked me something unexpected. What do you think changed you the most? I thought about it carefully. The heartbreak? The loneliness? The stress? The relationship? The answer surprised even me. Being needed, I said finally. Because that was the truth. Not in some unhealthy savior way, but in a human way. Having people genuinely care whether you come home changes how you move through life. Responsibility creates meaning. Connection creates resilience. That's one reason emotionally supportive relationships improve mental health so dramatically. Human beings regulate stress better when they feel securely connected to others. Basically, love stabilizes the nervous system. Science accidentally made romance sound like Wi-Fi support, but honestly it's true. And somewhere during those months, I stopped seeing myself as a failed person rebuilding life after disappointment. I started seeing myself as someone who survived difficult seasons and still remained capable of love. That distinction matters. A lot. Because identity shapes recovery. If you see yourself as broken, every setback feels permanent. But if you see yourself as growing, even painful experiences gain meaning. That night before bed, I walked through the apartment turning off lights quietly. The kids were asleep. Dishes clean. Rain still falling outside. Ordinary life. Beautifully ordinary life. And standing there in the silence, I realized something that would have sounded impossible to the lonely version of me from months earlier. I wasn't chasing happiness anymore. I was already living inside it. I just hadn't noticed how quietly it arrived. Failure brought me here. If you had met me a year earlier, you probably wouldn't recognize the person I was. Not physically. Emotionally. Back then, I measured my life through loss. Failed relationship. Loneliness. Stress. Confusion. The constant feeling that somehow everybody else understood adulthood better than I did. And honestly, I thought that version of my life was the final version. That's the strange thing about painful seasons. While you're inside them, they feel permanent. Your brain quietly convinces you that this sadness, this exhaustion, this emptiness, this is simply who you are now. But life rarely announces when it's rebuilding you. It happens slowly. Quietly. Almost invisibly. One ordinary moment at a time. By winter, nearly a full year had passed since the night I sat alone in my freezing car convinced everything was over. Now the same season had returned. Same cold air. Same early sunsets. Same city lights reflecting against wet streets. But I was different. Deeply different. One Friday evening, we decorated the apartment for Christmas while old music played softly in the background. The kids argued passionately about where lights should go like tiny emotionally unstable interior designers. Her son insisted the tree needed more red stuff. Her daughter disagreed with the confidence of a future lawyer. Meanwhile, I stood untangling Christmas lights, a task scientifically designed to destroy adult patience. At one point she looked over at me and laughed. "You're smiling." I didn't even realize I was. And maybe that's when it finally hit me. For months, happiness had stopped feeling temporary. That was new. Because after emotional failure, people often treat joy carefully, like fragile glass that could shatter without warning. You become hesitant to trust good moments fully. But healing changes that slowly. You stop scanning every situation for disaster. You stop preparing emotionally for abandonment every 5 minutes. You stop treating love like something guaranteed to disappear. And honestly, that transformation matters more than people realize. Psychologists explain that emotional recovery isn't just feeling better. Real healing happens when your nervous system no longer expects constant danger. Safety stops feeling suspicious. That's what changed in me. Not perfection. Safety. One snowy evening close to Christmas, I drove alone to the same grocery store where I once stood emotionally destroyed in front of frozen pizza. Same bright lights. Same shopping carts. Same tired people walking through aisles after work. But this time felt different. I caught myself smiling at the memory. Because strangely enough, I felt grateful for that painful version of myself. Not because suffering is beautiful. It isn't. But because that difficult season forced me to become honest about what I truly needed. Connection. Slowness. Meaningful relationships. Peace. Things I once ignored while chasing the wrong version of success. That's another thing America teaches people eventually. Achievement alone doesn't protect you from loneliness. You can have money, productivity, busy schedules, and still feel emotionally empty at night. Human beings need connection more than performance. And somewhere between heartbreak, coffee shop conversations, family dinners, stress, awkward English mistakes, and ordinary life, I finally understood that. One night after dinner, the kids fell asleep early on the couch while a movie played quietly in the background. She looked over at them and smiled softly. Then she asked me, "Do you think failure can actually lead people somewhere better?" Interesting question. Because a year earlier, I would have said no immediately. Failure felt humiliating back then. Like proof I wasn't good enough. Strong enough. Successful enough. But now? I looked around the apartment before answering. The half-finished mugs of tea on the table. The soft noise of the television. The peaceful exhaustion of ordinary family life. And honestly? Yes, I said quietly. I think sometimes failure interrupts the life that was slowly breaking you. She stared at me for a second. Then smiled like she already knew that answer. And maybe she did. Because both of us had lived through disappointment differently. That's another truth nobody talks about enough. Most adults you meet are carrying invisible heartbreaks. Failed relationships. Financial stress. Loneliness. Anxiety. Regret. Exhaustion. People become softer when they finally stop pretending otherwise. A few days later, while wrapping Christmas gifts at the kitchen table, her daughter suddenly asked me something completely unexpected. "Are you part of the family now?" Children really do skip directly past emotional defenses. I laughed nervously. "I think so." She nodded casually like this information had already been emotionally confirmed months ago. Then she returned to wrapping paper with complete confidence. And weirdly enough, that simple moment healed something inside me. Because for so long, I thought failure made people less lovable. less worthy, less capable of building good lives. But failure didn't ruin me. It humbled me. It slowed me down enough to recognize what actually mattered. That's different. Very different. Later that night, after everyone went to sleep, I stood quietly by the apartment window watching snow fall outside. The city looked peaceful. Soft. Almost unreal. And I thought about the lonely version of myself from the beginning of this story. The exhausted man sitting alone in a car believing life had ended. If I could talk to him now, I think I'd tell him something simple. Not motivational. Not dramatic. Just honest. I'd tell him this. Some seasons of life feel like endings when they're actually redirections. You don't always lose because you failed. Sometimes you lose because life is moving you toward people, experiences, and versions of yourself you couldn't have reached otherwise. And maybe that's the real lesson hidden inside heartbreak. Failure isn't always destruction. Sometimes it's an introduction. An introduction to a quieter kind of happiness. A slower life. A healthier love. A more honest version of yourself. And strangely enough, that version might end up being the one worth keeping. Sometimes the most painful chapter of your life is not the ending of your story, it's the beginning of the version of you that finally learns how to live honestly. A year ago, I thought failure had destroyed everything. I thought loneliness in America meant I was weak. I thought heartbreak meant life was moving backward. But looking back now, I realize something strange. The moments that almost broke me were also the moments quietly rebuilding me. Not through motivation. Not through perfect plans. But through ordinary life. A warm coffee shop on a cold night. Slow conversations. Awkward English mistakes. Family dinners. Children laughing in the next room. And one person who appeared exactly when I stopped believing life could still surprise me in a beautiful way. That's why this story was never really about perfect English, perfect love, or perfect success in the United States. It was about discovering that failure does not always mean you lost. Sometimes failure removes the life that no longer fits who you are becoming. And maybe, someone watching this right now needed to hear that more than anything. Maybe you're tired too. Maybe you feel emotionally lost. Maybe life in America, or life anywhere, feels heavier than you expected. But your story may not be ending. It may only be changing direction. And sometimes the quietest changes become the most life-changing ones. If this story stayed in your heart even for a moment, leave a comment below and share which part felt most personal to you. I read every comment, and your story may help someone else feel less alone tonight. And if you want more real English story practice videos about love, life, relationships, culture, family, and emotional healing through slow and easy English storytelling, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because the next story might feel even closer to your own life than this one. See you in the next video.